Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to the 2019 Halloween Horror Movie Guide. I do this video every single year and I just love sharing scary movies with you because horror films are some of my favorite films and I've probably seen a very unhealthy amount of them. This year, I'm going to focus on the best special effects pre-CGI, which essentially means 80s, it also means gory, and most of these movies were, at the time they were made, considered very brutal, very mean, very sort of hard R. Some of them have maintained that, some are kind of nasty, others have not aged as well, and some of the effect work and some of the things that were edgy at the time, like condom jokes, are now just sort of teenage and banal in a lot of ways. This year's list is designed to be sort of the perfect movie to put on for young teens that won't have them bored but also not traumatized. Hit a nice balance between cool, violent, scary, but not like really crazy messed up levels of horrible. And for those of you that are watching alone or just happen to be horror movie buffs, all of them have worthwhile plots, at least reasonable, sane, watchable plots, which unfortunately when it comes to horror movies, you don't always get that. So let's start off with movie number 1, which is The Blob, the 1988 remake of The Blob, which was originally made in the 1950s, but this one has a bigger budget and is way, way gorier. Like the 50s one is very banal, it could almost be a kid's movie. This one is definitely not. And I got the idea for this one because I was watching Cinemassacre's Monster Madness. However, I strongly disagree with the angry video game nerd that the 1950s one is better. I think the 1988 one is my personal preference. I think there's a lot going on in this script because the screenplay was written by Frank Darabont, who you may also know from writing The Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, The Mist, and The Walking Dead. So if you add The Blob to it, there's a lot of the something scripts, and while it's certainly not a perfect film by any measure, you can tell they were trying hard. It stars Kevin Dillon, who would later be famous for Entourage, and the plot of this film is initially pretty simple. A living blob of goo falls down from space into a small town, breaks out of a meteor, attacks a homeless person, and just starts eating things, just like absorbing them, melting them. It's like acid. As soon as it touches it just melts and burns and acidifies people and things. Every time it eats something, it gets bigger and it slowly becomes huge, and over time it also becomes more red because it's eating more people and we have, red blood. The only people who seem to know what are going on are some hapless teenagers. You've got the cheerleader, the jock, you've got the failure, and other students and sort of misfits from the town that all have to band together to try and save the day. The acting in this film is admittedly pretty mediocre. It's not the best by any measure, but it's good enough to keep the plot moving without being noticeably bad. And there aren't many red herrings. Pretty much everything that happens from the intro to the end is there for some plot point or purpose, even if it's maybe not the best executed. Everything you see in the intro will come back around. But the real star of this film is the blob itself, which in my opinion is an awesome effect. When I went back, I watched this movie recently for this review, I was shocked at how good the blob looked, even 30 years later, even in 1080p. Like, the blob itself could pass for a good effect literally today, and I will stand by that, especially near the end of the movie. They're doing some great blob effects. The way it moves and undulates, and you can see the layers, and I thought it was a really good effect. There's one downside though, and that's that the green screening is terrible, even by 80s standards. I don't know what they did. I think they just had the lights on the cameras in front of the green screen too bright, but it basically never matches the object behind it. There are some rough scenes where you've got this really cool looking blob effect doing neat stuff, and they try to green screen the actors on top of it, but the green screening looks bad, which Cinemassacre also pointed out, which is a shame because that's something they could easily fix in a Blu-ray re-release, but I guess that's not happening anytime soon, since this one was kind of a box office bomb. However, the movie itself is very gory, and the gore is of mixed qualities. Some of the scenes in this movie will still look shocking and violent and terrifying by today's standard, and a few of them I've seen very much so mirror videos that I've seen on LiveLeak. Others are kind of comically bad looking and you will find funny. The one that scared me the most of the child was this scene that I'm going to play in the background without audio so I don't get a strike, of the blob coming out of the sink. I had watched this movie when I was like 6 or 7 years old, and I found it a little scary, but I dealt with it well. And that just happened to be the night that they were doing some work on the pipes outside my house. So I turned on the sink, and all this rust, which was like a thick, viscous red liquid, just sprayed out of my sink at turbo speed, and I was terrified. I thought it was the Blob. I ran out of the house screaming, wouldn't come back in until my parents came out to get me, and that's probably one of the times they decided I shouldn't be watching scary movies, but I thought it was just a bad sort of coincidence. There's some neat ideas that are played with in the film that aren't very well developed, some clever ones like the Blob is no longer jelly or goo, rather it's kind of a giant amoeba, so it looks like something you would see under a microscope. It's no longer an alien, it's a Cold War science project gone wrong, and you have very subversive heroes. The hero of the film is not who you think it is twice. Overall, very fun movie to watch if you don't take it too seriously. Definitely does have a few flaws and dull moments though. Let's move on to another movie that is it's a slower paced one and it has a few dull moments, but is overwhelmingly much scarier in my opinion, and that's The Fly from 1986, which is another remake of a 50s classic, The Fly. For some reason, the 80s was all about remaking stuff from the 50s, and now we're remaking stuff from the 80s. There's like a remake cycle going on. This one was written and directed by David Cronenberg, who's famous for making all sorts of weird, psychedelic, and body horror type movies, and it stars none other than Jeff Goldblum, who I'm sure you're all very, very familiar with. You don't need me to tell you about him. And the plot of this movie is another very simple one. Jeff Goldblum is a scientist who invents a teleportation machine. Go you! But he's sort of a nutter. He's outside the mainstream scientific community, so he can't get anybody to take him seriously. No budget for a proper test. So he wants to test it on himself to prove that it can work. However, when he goes into the machine to teleport, a tiny little fly just flies in right behind him on the door, and he's teleported along with the fly. The problem with this is that he only programmed the computer to teleport one organism at a time, which is why he's always getting in the machine naked. He didn't know what it would do with his clothes. And the computer didn't know what to do with the fly and the human, so it decided to mesh the two together at a DNA level. It meshed the human and fly DNA. So as this movie progresses, he slowly starts transforming into a human-fly hybrid. It starts off with he's feeling a little weird, he has a bad dream, he's losing hair, a tooth falls out, his nails are coming, his skin's itchy, and then he starts bloating, and then he has to eat his food by throwing up on it, and his fingers start fusing, and he just continues to devolve throughout the course of the film until he's literally turning into sort of a man-fly hybrid. And at this point, the movie is sort of a slow horror, a body horror movie about a miserable transformation. I think it's supposed to be some sort of play on how bad it can be to be handicapped. And it ruins this man's life. It ruins his love life. It ruins his professional life. He starts to think more insect-like with less emotion. He starts to struggle to connect with people. And everything just gets increasingly chaotic before it ends in a big, violent, crazy conclusion. And the ending of this movie is violent and like bananas just in and of itself, but I think the horror part of this one is about the journey, about the fall of a man. It's almost like a tragedy. I will say though, don't watch this one if you're eating. There's some stuff aside from just people getting shot and gore and like deaths that are a lot of like body fluids that would be kind of gross if you were eating a dinner, especially a wet dinner. Moving along to the next video, let's do something a little bit more traditional, which is vampires. Sort of. In my opinion, Fright Night from 1985 is one of the best modern vampire movies, and it has a sort of weird and subversive plot that works really well. And one point of this plot is that it's got some big-time homoerotic undertones. And this is something, as a kid when I watched it, I totally didn't get. But as an adult, it's like painfully obvious. So if you want to watch a movie with gay undertones about people that struggle with their sexuality, well, that's this one. The basic plot of this movie is that a young man is intrigued by his handsome new neighbor who moves in out of nowhere and has an equally handsome manservant. The neighbor is always bringing over young, beautiful women who never leave. The younger man spies on him all the time, and he sees him having sex with these women. If you care about nudity for whoever you're showing this to, there's some boobies in this one. But the women never leave the house, and the guy never comes out at night. He has this kind of peculiar accent. He's got a sort of aura around him, an oppressively gay one. The main character is struggling with his relationship with his girlfriend, and this new man comes in like a wrecking ball and crushes it almost as if it's a person in the closet struggling with themselves. And over time, this turns into a very unhealthy obsession, and he starts to stalk the neighbor and take pictures of the neighbor. And eventually, he discovers that yes, his neighbor is a vampire. But being young and dumb and not so bright, he tries to get his girlfriend and his friend to help, and they don't care. They think he's out of his mind and he's stalking this other dude. More gay stuff. And he eventually manages to get in touch with an elderly horror movie host, like a sort of male Elvira. Kind of reminds me of the Van Helsing character from these old, like, Hammer Dracula movies. He's like a really hammy TV vampire hunter that hosts silly movie nights, kind of like the kind of content you're watching here. And he goes to this guy to try to help him convince him to kill the vampire. The TV show host isn't having any of this. He's a cranky, mean, self-absorbed old man, but he reluctantly agrees to help the youth in order to try and prove that our main character is wrong. He's like, maybe if I can show that this kid is wrong and go talk to his neighbor and get him to come out and shake hands during the daylight, that, you know, he'll know he's not a vampire and he won't go hunt him down and kill him. And I'll do a good thing. And at this point, hijinks just begin to ensue. That's about the halfway point in the movie, so I'll stop the plot summary. But at this point, it's him, his girlfriend, his friend, the manservant, the vampire, the old man vampire hunter, and they're just like chasing each other around in circles, doing all sorts of silly stuff. And I will say that the movie's tone does shift a lot. It will start off kind of funny and subversive, but then rapidly swap to something that's actually horrifying or gory or scary. And then it has this sort of homoerotic undertone to it, which would be really rare for media in the 80s, but in like a weird closeted way. I think the plot is like he really sort of likes the handsome neighbor and he can't decide between his girlfriend or trying something new, and the whole plot kind of plays out like that. And then all of a sudden it'll just get super violent and gory for no reason, or just regular violent where people fight and destroy stuff. I don't want to spoil the plot of this movie, but it is an overall neat watch, and I think it's a very good example of a modern vampire movie. However, I will say, I put this on my like best of special effects pre-CGI. Most of the special effects and gore and stuff like that you won't see until near the end of the movie. The first half of this is almost like a whodunit sort of mystery thing. At the end of the movie is where a lot of the crazy and the cool special effects show up. The final movie on our list this year, we're doing a few less than normal because, well, I wanted to speak more in depth about them instead of just going through quickly, is Pumpkinhead from 1988. This one was directed by Stan Winston, who you may recognize the name from this. He did a lot of work with James Cameron on Terminator and Aliens, and he was one of the best practical special effects artists of the 1980s. Like, when you think about good 80s effects, he probably had a hand in it, or at least invented the technique. This is his first, or one of very few movies that he actually directed, which is a little different. And the movie also stars Lance Henriksen, better known as Bishop from Aliens. You've probably seen this guy in almost every scary movie ever for like the last 30 years, and he's still cranking them out. The plot of Pumpkinhead is a little bit less straightforward than the other ones. The other ones are like violent, gory, whatever. This one is all those things, but the plot needs a little bit more explaining. Essentially, Lance Henriksen plays a sort of country farmer, a redneck farmer, if you will. A simpleton, a good guy, he works hard, and he really cares for his only son because his wife passed. It's just him and his boy, and he looks after his boy, and he's a good guy. But his son is killed after accidentally being run over by a group of teenagers. The teens, instead of staying and trying to help and be responsible, mostly don't do any of that and just run away and try to get away with murder, essentially. The police can't help, he has no idea who did it, so he's pissed. And he goes to this elderly witch that he remembers from his own childhood to try to get revenge, and she offers him a deal. His soul in exchange for revenge against these teenagers. And he agrees, of course, and in return he summons this, she summons this gigantic 9-foot-tall demon, affectionately named Pumpkinhead, that begins slaughtering those that are responsible. However, in this case, revenge isn't so easy. Part of this deal of his soul is that he's losing a piece of his soul with every kill, and he also has to see, feel, hear, and just experience every single person that the demon kills so that he really gets to know what the cost of the revenge is. And every time somebody dies, he begins to lose a piece of himself and become more of a demon as the plot progresses. However, after just seeing one kill, just one single person, he realizes that he's done something wrong. The once kind, gentle, and loving man has returned, and he knows that he's done something wrong, something that his son wouldn't be proud of. So he sets out on a one-man journey to kill the demon and to save the people that killed his son. And at this point, basically the whole movie is man versus demon versus teenagers, and they're all chasing each other around in circles and trying to kill each other, and plot points kind of come and go, and it gets chaotic. The movie doesn't shy away from gore, and it especially does not shy away from showing the monster. There is a lot of monster in this movie, which is why I don't feel bad at all about showing you the screenshots of it, because it's just constantly going in. The monster itself is why I put it in here. It's an excellent effect for the time, and it generally works and holds up today, in my opinion. The monster does look a lot like the alien from the movie Aliens, the sequel, or even really the original, like a xenomorph kind of alien. And I think that's because, you know, he worked on the previous movies and he had some experience and he knew how to make it look and move and articulate kind of like the aliens, which were very scary in of itself. And one way to think about this movie is it's sort of like redneck Alien. And you're kind of close, but I don't want to spoil the ending or how it all pans out, but this one is definitely a creature feature that has a lot of creature. Guys, that is all for this Halloween horror movie guide. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.